Everything you think you know about the Underworld is a fabrication designed to keep you afraid of the dark. For centuries, your ancestors were fed a steady diet of mythic propaganda, a thousand-year lie that painted Hades as a twisted monster, a terrifying kidnapper lurking in the shadows. But what if the person they feared was actually the only one who stayed true? Look past the Hollywood monsters and the campfire tales. Look at the reality of the Greek pantheon. While the other Olympians indulged in petty whims, fleeting lusts, and chaotic outbursts, Hades remained a pillar of grim consistency. He didn't seek out conflict, nor did he crave power for the sake of glory. He accepted the most grueling, thankless role in existence, the keeper of the dead. He was the only Olympian who fulfilled his duty without complaint. While Zeus ruled with lightning and Poseidon commanded the waves, Hades sat in the silence, ensuring the cosmic balance remained intact. He wasn't a villain lurking in the shadows, he was the guardian of the inevitable. The stories were twisted to turn a stoic administrator into a monster, because it was easier to fear a man than to respect his discipline. You've been taught to see a monster, but the truth is far more profound. He was the only one who truly did what he was told. Imagine being cast into a void where your only companion is the crushing weight of everyone's final moments. While you look for connection, something is watching, waiting in the shadows of what comes next. While his siblings were granted the privilege of the sunlit world, roaming among the vibrant toys and living pleasures of the mortal realm, Hades was condemned to a different fate entirely. He didn't get the throne of light or the worship of the living. Instead, he was shackled to a kingdom of absolute silence. He became the keeper of the threshold, the one forced to bear the heavy, agonizing weight of every soul's transition from life into death. Think about the isolation of that role. Every name whispered in fear, every spirit crossing the line, becomes a burden he must carry alone. He isn't just a ruler, he is the custodian of the ultimate transition, while his brothers and sisters inhabited the noise of existence. Hades was locked away to manage the inventory of the lost. He stands at the gate where now becomes forever, processing the transition of every human spirit that ever breathes its last. You might see a myth, but he lived the reality of an eternal watch, a lonely sentinel presiding over a realm where the only thing louder than the silence is the weight of what has been lost. You are looking at a man who chose a life of shadow, but what if I told you that his isolation wasn't a preference, it was a sentence? You might think his darkness was a personal choice, a deliberate retreat into the void to escape the light of public scrutiny. But look closer at the architecture of his existence, and the truth reveals something far more chilling. In the ancient Greek lore, every action served a cosmic function. There was no room for individual whim when it came to the stability of the universe. He didn't walk into the shadows to hide from you. He stayed there because the laws dictated that he must remain in the shadows to maintain the cosmic balance. If he were to step forward, if he were to let his presence be fully known by the common eye, the very scales of reality would tilt. Every shadow he cast was a calculated necessity, a structural pillar holding up a world you can barely perceive. He wasn't a hermit, he was a guardian of equilibrium. The darkness wasn't a veil he pulled over his eyes, it was a cage built by ancient decree to ensure that the gears of the cosmos never grind to a halt. To understand him, you have to understand that his silence wasn't a secret he kept, but a debt he paid to keep your world standing. Imagine the moment your entire reality begins to unravel, the ground beneath your feet liquefying and the laws of physics simply ceasing to exist. You wouldn't just be watching a disaster, you would be witnessing the literal disintegration of the mortal world as it was built. If he had ever stepped into the light, if his physical form had dared to cross that threshold of shadow, the fabric of our existence would have dissolved into absolute chaos. It isn't just a metaphor for destruction, it is a catastrophic structural failure of reality itself. Every mountain, every city, and every human life is held together by a fragile, invisible architecture. Had he sought the throne of Zeus, that ultimate seat of cosmic authority, the sheer magnitude of his presence would have acted like a corrosive acid on our dimension. The transition from shadow to light wouldn't just be a change in visibility. It would be an invitation for total collapse. You are only alive today because that boundary remained uncrossed. He stayed hidden not out of choice, but as a desperate safeguard against the annihilation of everything you see around you. One step toward that throne, one moment of exposure, and the veil between our world and the void would have torn open. We live in the silence of his absence, safe only because he remained in the dark. You might believe that history is a neutral record of facts, but in reality, it is often a carefully curated weapon used to decide who lives in our memories and who is cast into the shadows. You have been told a story of heroes and villains, but you haven't been told how that line was drawn. There is a specific reason why his name became synonymous with evil, while his brothers were celebrated as heroic. It wasn't a coincidence of character. Nor was it a random twist of fate, it was a calculated construction of narrative. While his brothers were elevated to the status of icons, their names etched in gold and their actions framed as selfless sacrifices for the greater good, his name was systematically stripped of its humanity. He became the convenient scapegoat, the singular face of malice used to justify the very systems that his heroic brothers helped build, by isolating him as the sole villain. The victors created a convenient binary. They gave you a monster to fear so you wouldn't have to look too closely at the motives of the men standing next to him. One brother became the symbol of salvation, the other became the cautionary tale. Every word used to describe his malice was a brick in a wall designed to keep his true identity hidden from your sight. Imagine standing in a void so vast that even your screams would be swallowed by the vacuum before they could travel an inch. You are completely alone. This is the terrifying reality of his existence, not a choice he made for glory, but a sentence served in silence. It wasn't because of what he did, but because of what he was forced to endure, the isolation of being the cosmic janitor. Most people fear death, but they rarely consider the horror of eternal solitude among the stars. He became the scavenger of the universe, tasked with collecting the debris of dying suns and the jagged remnants of collapsed civilizations. While humanity looked toward the heavens dreaming of conquest, he was stationed in the margins, performing a chore so fundamental yet so lonely that it effectively erased his identity from the map of human history. Every scrap of cosmic waste had to be cleared, every celestial hazard had to be neutralized. He became a ghost in the machinery of the cosmos. You might think his duty would provide purpose, but the truth is far more haunting. The sheer scale of the task meant he ceased to be a man and became a function. He was the invisible hand cleaning the stains of creation, forgotten by everyone except the very void he served. You've been told that death is an ending, a final wall where your journey stops. But what if the truth is far more unsettling? What if the transition isn't a void, but a high-stakes corridor you are forced to navigate? Look closely at the geography of the Underworld. It wasn't a forgotten dungeon, a dark prison cell, or a place of arbitrary punishment. It was something far more systematic and essential. Think of it as a massive, ancient processing center. A grinding gear in the machinery of existence. Every soul moving through that landscape wasn't being discarded, they were being filtered. You have to understand that for the cycle of life to remain stable, there must be a mechanism to sort, weigh, and transition the energy of the living into the requirements of the next phase. It was a bureaucratic necessity of the cosmos. Every gate, every river, and every shadow in that geography served as a checkpoint in a grand logistical operation. If this processing center failed, the cycle would collapse, and life as you know it would grind to a halt. You aren't looking at a land of punishment. You are looking at the ultimate sorting facility where every soul is processed to ensure the universe keeps turning. The geography was designed for function, not fear, but in that hall of processing, your place in the cycle is finally defined. Stop scrolling for a second and listen closely, because there is a cold, inescapable truth about your own existence that most people spend their entire lives trying to ignore. Every single time you feel that sudden heavy weight of mortality, that sharp prickle of realization that your time is finite, you aren't just experiencing a fleeting anxiety. You are touching the very reality Hades was forced to manage alone. Imagine the isolation of that throne. In the ancient underworld, Hades wasn't a villain, he was the administrator of the inevitable. He sat in the silence where the clock finally stops, overseeing the transition from is to was. When you feel that tightening in your chest when you think about the end, you are experiencing the same cosmic weight he carried every single day. It is the ultimate burden of the finite. Most people run from this sensation because it feels like a threat, but in reality, it is the most honest truth of the human condition. Hades didn't choose his kingdom, it was the structural necessity of the world. By acknowledging that weight, you aren't succumbing to fear, you are finally recognizing the boundary lines of your own life. You are stepping into the same corridor of truth that defined his eternal reign, the reality that for everything to have value, it must eventually come to a close. You are walking through history, believing you know the truth of his legacy, but you are being lied to. There is a chilling reality buried beneath the surface of every textbook and cinematic retelling, a jagged, uncomfortable truth that many have chosen to scrub from the record entirely. Yet there is a terrifying secret hidden in his lineage that most modern retellings completely erase. They polish the edges of the story until the sharpest parts disappear, smoothing over the bloodline with layers of convenient myth. But when you peel back those layers, the cracks appear. It isn't just a footnote, it's a fundamental contradiction to the image he projects today. By removing this specific piece of his ancestry, the modern narrative creates a sanitized vacuum, leaving you with a hero who is only half real. They want you to look away from the lineage that defines his true origin. Why? Because the truth they are hiding isn't just uncomfortable, it's volatile. It challenges the very foundation of his authority and forces you to question everything you were told about his rise. Every time a storyteller skips this chapter, they aren't just making it shorter, they are burying a secret so potent it could collapse the entire narrative structure. You have to decide, do you accept the polished lie, or do you look into the shadow of what was hidden? You are looking at the foundation of everything you own, yet you have no idea how much of your world rests on a single, ancient authority. He wasn't just a ruler, he was the protector of the wealth of the earth, the literal minerals and metals that sustain civilization. Imagine a world where the very ground beneath your feet is a vault, and he held the only key. We often think of wealth as paper money or digital digits, but those are mere illusions compared to the raw, primal power of the deep earth. He guarded the copper that sparked the first wires, the iron that forged the tools of survival, and the precious metals that fueled empires. Every bridge you cross, every device you hold in your hand, and every skyscraper piercing the skyline began as a hidden deposit in the dirt. By securing these resources, he didn't just rule a territory, he secured the literal chemistry of human progress. Without his protection of these core materials, the gears of civilization would grind to a halt, leaving nothing but a silent, primitive wasteland. He stood at the crossroads of history, ensuring that the veins of metal deep underground remained accessible for the advancement of man. To lose his grip on these minerals was to lose the future itself. Imagine standing in a land where your next meal depends entirely on what lies beneath your feet, where the difference between survival and starvation is measured in inches of earth. When people spoke of his riches, they weren't talking about gold coins, buried chests, or heavy bags of coin clinking in a vault. They were speaking of something far more visceral, far more primal, the very soil that fed their starving children. To an outsider, wealth is a number on a ledger. To a starving village, wealth is the life-giving dirt that produces grain, root, and fruit. He didn't own a treasury, he controlled the means of existence. Every time someone whispered about his fortune, they were actually mourning the fact that their children's lives hung in the balance of his land ownership. You have to understand the stakes involved. If he decided the soil was no longer for them, their lineage ended. It wasn't a matter of greed, it was a matter of survival. The tension lay in that physical ground, a tangible, dusty reality that held the power of life and death over every family in the valley. He didn't just own acres of dirt, he held the very keys to their children's tomorrow, making him the most powerful man they had ever known. You were being lied to by the very stories you were told as a child, because someone decided that his true nature was too dangerous for the public to see clearly. Look closely at the transformation, the deliberate, calculated shift in narrative. But why did the poets turn this protector into a kidnapper and a villain? They didn't just change a few adjectives, they performed a systematic demolition of his character, by weaving a web of allegories and metaphors. They took a figure who stood as a shield against chaos and recast him as the architect of it. Notice how the ink shifted from gold to shadow. They took the very symbols of his protection and twisted them into shackles of imprisonment. It was an intentional inversion, a literary hijacking designed to ensure you would fear his shadow instead of seeking shelter beneath it. When a poet changes a hero's role from guardian to kidnapper, they aren't just writing a different story. They are rewriting your perception of safety itself. They chose the word kidnapper because it implies a theft of freedom, a way to make you view his actions as an act of aggression rather than one of preservation. Every stanza was a calculated move in a long game of psychological repositioning, turning a sanctuary into a cage and a protector into a villain you are now conditioned to loathe. You are looking at something that terrifies you, but your brain is choosing a safer lie just to keep you moving forward. It is far easier to demonize a silent guardian than it is to confront the raw, haunting reality of your own inevitable end. Think about the mechanics of fear. When faced with an overwhelming truth, the fact that your time is finite and your presence in this world is fleeting, the human mind recoils. It searches for a target. It looks for a villain to blame for the ticking clock. Instead of facing the void, we point our fingers at the protectors who stand between us and the inevitable. We cast them as monsters because it is psychologically safer to fight a visible enemy than to sit in the silence of an approaching finish line. This psychological pivot isn't just a quirk of human nature, it is a survival mechanism that backfires. By painting the guardian as the antagonist, you create a distraction. You turn a profound existential crisis into a simple conflict you can win. But when the noise fades and the shadows lengthen, the truth remains. The guardian isn't trying to haunt you, they are standing in the gap where your fear lives. We choose the myth of the villain because the reality of our mortality is a weight no one wants to carry alone. You have been lied to since your first day in a classroom, and the truth is buried beneath centuries of convenient storytelling. Look closely at the specific myth of Persephone, the narrative you were taught in school. The simple tale of a girl snatched by a god and a seasonal cycle of pomegranate seeds is fundamentally broken by historical scholarship. What if I told you that the version sitting in your head isn't just an old story, but a curated distortion for generations? Educators have handed you a polished, sanitized myth to make the ancient world digestible, but modern scholars are stripping away those layers of fiction to reveal something far more complex and unsettling. When we look at the actual archaeological evidence and the primary texts, the fairy tale elements begin to crumble. The scholarship doesn't just suggest that the story was different, it proves that the narrative you were taught is structurally flawed. You aren't looking at a simple fable about spring and winter anymore. You are standing on the edge of historical reconstruction where every known fact is being interrogated. By peeling back the layers of academic myth-making, we find that the original truths of Persephone were far more nuanced, and perhaps more haunting than any schoolbook could ever dare to print. Stay with me, because the reality behind the myth changes everything you thought you knew about ancient worship. You think you know what it means to be trapped, but the most dangerous cages are the ones we build with our own consent. You might imagine a scene of struggle, a desperate flight, or a sudden capture, but the truth behind her journey is far more unsettling because it was rooted in an agreement. She didn't fall into his hands as a victim of circumstance or a casualty of chance. No, she walked into that arrangement with eyes wide open. Choosing to become a bride who would navigate a life divided by design, she wasn't a prisoner of his will, she was an architect of her own paradox. By agreeing to share her time between two worlds, she established a deliberate seasonal cycle for growth. Think about the psychological weight of that transition, moving between spheres of existence like a tide shifting with the moon. It wasn't a chaotic collapse into his life, but a calculated oscillation. Every season had its purpose. Every period of time was partitioned to cultivate something specific in her own development. She traded a singular path for a dual existence, weaving two separate realities into one cohesive tapestry of growth. You are looking at a woman who didn't lose her agency. She traded it for a complex, rhythmic evolution that most would never have the courage to navigate. You are never truly safe from the shadows of your own fears, and for the ancient Greeks, those shadows took a human shape. Imagine standing in a world where the boundary between life and death isn't just a concept, it is a physical terror that sits right at your doorstep. The Greeks faced a haunting reality, the inevitability of their own end. To cope with this existential dread, they needed a vessel to contain it. They found that vessel in her. By turning her story into a narrative of abduction and kidnapping, the Greeks weren't just telling a myth. They were projecting their visceral fear of death onto a woman who was actually fulfilling nothing more than a specific ritual role. She became the scapegoat for their collective anxiety. Every time she was taken, it was a mirror of their own loss of control over mortality. They transformed her existence into a tragedy to mask the truth, that death is the ultimate kidnapper. By rewriting her life as a forced disappearance, they manufactured a way to process a trauma they couldn't face directly. She became a symbol, a container for the screams of a civilization terrified of the silence of the grave. They didn't just write a story, they built a psychological fortress, turning a ritual duty into a mythic struggle against the void. You might believe you understand the power of a myth, but what if I told you that every symbol you see in ancient lore is actually a desperate mask hiding a devastating truth? You have to look past the gold and the marble to see the chilling reality underneath. This wasn't just an artistic choice, it was a psychological shield against the terrifying fact that Hades never chose his throne. In the eyes of the ancients, power isn't always something you seize with your own hands, sometimes. It is a prison sentence imposed by fate. They knew that to speak of his role openly was to acknowledge a haunting reality. He didn't step forward out of ambition or desire. He was forged into the role by the very earth itself. Every ornate crown and every ceremonial decree served as a mental fortress, a way to bury the chilling truth of his involuntary sovereignty. If you look closely at the iconography, you can see the cracks in the facade. They had to create these elaborate layers of ritual just to cope with the fact that he was bound to the underworld by an inescapable decree. The myth didn't just tell a story, it functioned as a psychological barrier, shielding both the deity and the worshipper from the horrifying realization that his reign was not a choice, but a sentence. Imagine if the only thing standing between you and a world overrun by the restless dead was a single, deliberate choice of temperament. You might think mercy is a virtue, but in the ancient laws of the cosmos, kindness is a dangerous luxury that can shatter the very fabric of reality. If he had been kind in the way Zeus was, granting life where there should be none and permission where there should be boundaries, the dead would have wandered back into the land of the living. Think about the implications of that transgression. It isn't just a moral lapse, it is a catastrophic breach of the natural order. If those gates had swung open, the boundary between the breathing and the ghostless would have dissolved instantly. You wouldn't just be facing a ghost, you would be facing an invasion of the dead into your streets, your homes, and your very lives. By refusing to be kind, in that specific, perilous way, he wasn't being cruel, he was acting as a gatekeeper. He held the line against a tide of wandering souls that would have overwhelmed the living. Every soul that remained in the shadows stayed there because he refused to offer the mercy of a resurrection. He chose the safety of the divide over the chaos of a world where the dead refused to stay buried. You might look at his face and see only a man hardened by circumstance, but what you are actually witnessing is a prehistoric survival mechanism staring back at you. You think he chose to be this way, that his sternness was simply a personality trait or a personal preference for authority. It wasn't. In the brutal calculus of human evolution, his demeanor was a biological necessity for the very survival of our species. Imagine a world where there is no safety net. where one moment of hesitation or a single lapse in discipline results in total extinction. In that environment, a leader who was soft was a leader who allowed the tribe to perish. Every furrow in his brow and every cold command he issued served as a psychological fortress, designed to override fear and ensure the collective stayed alive. He wasn't being difficult, he was acting as a biological filter, stripping away the luxury of hesitation to prioritize the raw instinct of preservation. When you look at him, you aren't seeing a man who chose to be cold. You are seeing the evolutionary byproduct of thousands of years of high-stakes survival. He became the iron gate against chaos, understanding that for the human race to endure, some individuals had to embody the discipline that others were too afraid to maintain. It was the price of staying alive. You might think the true horror of his existence was simply the silence of his solitude, but you are only seeing the surface of a much more unsettling truth. Look closer at the artifacts left behind, and you will realize that the tragedy goes deeper than just his isolation. It involves the very way he is depicted in ancient pottery. These aren't just decorative vessels, they are a haunting record of how history chose to frame his identity. When you trace the lines of these clay figures, you see a deliberate, recurring narrative etched into the earth. Every curve and stroke on these pots serves as a permanent decree on who he was allowed to be in the eyes of the public. Each piece of pottery acts as a haunting mirror, reflecting not just a man, but a version of him constructed by those who came before us. By examining these specific depictions, we uncover a disturbing pattern of cultural branding that stripped away his complexity and replaced it with a static, curated image. They didn't just leave him alone, they carved his likeness into the very fabric of their culture, ensuring his story would be told exactly as they demanded. Every shard you see holds a secret about the manipulation of memory, turning a human life into a permanent, silent caricature frozen in clay for centuries. Look closely at the iconography of power, because what they chose to hide from you speaks louder than any word ever spoken in a temple. Notice how his face is almost always obscured, shrouded in shadow or locked into a stern, impenetrable mask, while Zeus and Poseidon are depicted with flowing hair and open, inviting expressions. You might think this is just an artistic choice, but in the ancient world, visual language was a survival mechanism. When you look at Zeus and Poseidon, their features are accessible. They represent the tangible forces of the storm and the sea, gods who communicate through direct, visible majesty. They are meant to be seen, understood, and appealed to. But his portrayal tells a different story entirely. By masking his features, the creators of these icons were signaling something far more dangerous, an authority that does not need to be understood to be obeyed. It is the difference between a king who rules by presence and a force that rules by mystery. While the others offer their faces to the worshipper, he offers only a wall. This visual disparity creates a psychological barrier, forcing you to confront the terrifying reality of a power so absolute that it doesn't need an expression. He remains hidden because his true nature is not meant for human eyes. It is something you are meant to fear. You might think you know why his features were scrubbed from every record, but the truth is far more chilling than a simple physical deformity. You have to ask yourself, what happens when a person becomes so significant that their individual identity is erased to protect the sanctity of their position? They weren't hiding his face because he was ugly, they were honoring his role as the inviolate one. To the witnesses who stood in his shadow, his physical appearance was irrelevant. He wasn't a man with a face, he was a vessel for an office that transcended human anatomy. By stripping away his features from the archives, they weren't concealing a flaw, they were codifying a status. They were ensuring that anyone looking back through the pages of history wouldn't see a person with flaws, fears, or human desires. Instead, you are forced to confront an icon. Every time a portrait was redacted, or a name was replaced by a title. It served as a warning. His presence was so absolute that to view him as an individual would be to diminish the power he wielded. They chose to turn him into a ghost in plain sight, crafting a legacy where the role eclipsed the man. You are looking at a deliberate masterpiece of preservation, where the ultimate sacrifice was his very identity. You are walking towards something you were never meant to see, a truth so fundamental it feels like a physical threat to your survival. In the ancient echoes of myth, there was one figure who stood as the ultimate mirror for this terror. To look upon him directly wasn't just an act of observation, it was a confrontation with a reality that modern life has taught you to ignore. They say that if you truly gazed into his eyes, you would be forced to acknowledge a truth that humanity simply wasn't ready to hear. That death is not your enemy. It isn't a monster lurking in the shadows or a hunter chasing you through the woods. Instead, it is a constant. It is an ever-present, inescapable pulse beneath the surface of every breath you take. By framing death as a villain, we create a shield of comfort, but in the old stories, this figure stripped that shield away. He exposed the terrifying mechanics of existence, showing that mortality isn't something that happens to you at the end, it is the very fabric of your being right now. Every heartbeat is a countdown, every breath is a narrowing window. To face him was to lose the comforting lie of safety and accept the raw, undeniable reality of the present moment. You cannot look away, because once you see it, you can never unsee it. You are looking at a reflection of your own mortality, and it is a truth most people spend their entire lives trying to outrun. Look closely at his face, the way he was cast as the ultimate villain in our biological tragedy. He became the scapegoat for the human fear of the grave, a convenient target for our deepest, most primal terror, the fact that every cell in your body is currently marching toward its own expiration. We cannot bear to look at the rot. So we project it onto him. We take the inevitable decay of the body and transform it into a moral failing, as if by blaming him we can somehow bargain with time itself. He didn't choose this role, he was drafted into it by our collective denial. Every time you feel that cold shiver when you think about the end, that is the weight of centuries of human anxiety being funneled into one single point. He carries the burden of the decomposing tissue, the failing organs, and the inevitable silence of the earth. By making him the symbol of death, we try to distance ourselves from the fact that the decay is already happening within us. But his presence remains a haunting reminder. You can exile the blame onto him, but you cannot stop the clock from ticking for yourself. Imagine standing in a stadium of thousands where every eye is fixed on you, not as a hero, but as something they are terrified to acknowledge. While your brothers stepped into the blinding sunlight to claim the adoration of the masses, one brother chose a path that most would find unbearable. He accepted the shame of being the feared stranger. You can see the contrast in the very atmosphere. One side is bathed in golden light, celebrated by the roar of the crowd for their public triumphs. The other sits in the heavy, silent shadows where no one dares to look. Hades didn't just choose a different role, he stepped into the void that others fled from. He embraced the isolation of the underworld, trading the fickle worship of men for a domain that demanded absolute respect and profound dread. To the public, his position was a mark of disgrace. The outcast, the one they whispered about in hushed tones, only when they thought no one was listening. But look closer at the architecture of this choice. By accepting the title of the stranger, he gained a power his brothers could never touch, the authority over the inevitable. He traded their fleeting fame for an eternal, haunting sovereignty. In the high-stakes game of mythic survival, he became the only one who owned what everyone else ultimately feared to face alone. You are standing in a position that would shatter the human psyche, a role where your greatest power is also your ultimate isolation. Imagine the crushing weight of existence when you are the only deity in an entire pantheon who can never be celebrated, worshipped, or heralded as a savior. Instead, for every action you take, for every duty you fulfill, you are met with nothing but visceral, paralyzing fear. You aren't just performing a job. You are fulfilling a cosmic necessity that others cannot comprehend, and the very fact that you do what is required makes you a monster in their eyes. Picture the psychological toll of this paradox. Your success is their terror. Every time you step forward to maintain the balance, the world recoils from you as if you were a predator. You are trapped in a lonely cycle where your competence is mistaken for malice. They see the blade you wield to protect them, and they forget that without it, they would be destroyed by something far worse. You inhabit a space of profound solitude, forced to endure the hatred of the very people whose survival depends on your actions. It is the ultimate betrayal of identity, to be indispensable yet untouchable, a protector who must live in shadows because the truth of your role is too terrifying for them to embrace. Imagine standing before an altar where the very laws of existence are weighed against your life. You aren't just walking into a cave or a shadowed forest, you are stepping onto a stage where every move you make is being judged by forces older than time itself. Every time a Greek hero descended into his realm, they weren't going to a prison, they were entering a court of law. In these subterranean depths, the rules of the surface world dissolved, replaced by a rigid, uncompromising legal code governed by the gods. The monsters they faced weren't just mindless beasts, they were often the physical manifestations of broken oaths and violated decrees. When a hero crossed that threshold, they entered a zone where their every action was scrutinized. A single misplaced word or a momentary lapse in ritual wasn't just a mistake, it was a breach of contract with the divine. The underworld functioned as a supreme tribunal, where the heroes were not mere prisoners, but defendants in a trial for their own mortality. They had to navigate a labyrinth of celestial laws to survive. If they could uphold the sacred protocols of the deep, they might find passage. If they failed, the law would claim them instantly. You aren't watching a journey of physical strength. You are watching a high-stakes legal battle played out in blood and shadow. You are looking at a man who sees what everyone else chooses to ignore, the invisible expiration date ticking away in every human life. Most people spend their lives judging others by their moral failings, the lies they told, the mistakes they made, or the sins they committed in the dark. They focus on the why of a person's actions, but he operates on a different, far more chilling logic. He doesn't care about the morality of their choices, he judges them based on one cold, undeniable fact: their time in the sun has simply run out. Imagine standing before him and realizing that your history, your excuses, and your justifications mean absolutely nothing. In his eyes, you aren't a collection of mistakes, you are a clock reaching zero. He isn't looking for a reason to condemn you, he is acknowledging the inevitable conclusion of your timeline. This creates a terrifying gap in understanding, while the world debates right and wrong. He is watching the shadows lengthen over their lives. It's not about what they did, it's about the fact that they have reached the boundary of their allotted time. You cannot bargain with a deadline, you cannot negotiate with an ending. He sees the sunset, while everyone else is still arguing over the weather. You think you know who the monster in this narrative is, but you've been looking at the wrong face for far too long. You have been conditioned by a comfortable lie to cast him as the antagonist, the villain lurking in the shadows of your morality. But if you peel back the layers of history and look at the raw, unvarnished truth, a terrifying reality emerges. He isn't the one trying to tear your world down. He's the only god who stayed true to his post while everyone else played at being heroes. While they traded their integrity for public acclaim and staged themselves in the spotlight of morality, he remained in the trenches of duty. They were performers on a stage, seeking the applause of the masses, dancing through their roles as saviors while ignoring the grim requirements of the actual mission. He didn't care about the narrative or the way his actions looked to the crowd. He cared only for the oath he took. Every hero you admire is just a ghost in a costume, chasing a fleeting sense of righteousness. But he stood firm. He accepted the burden of being hated so that the foundation could hold. You've been taught to fear him because his honesty is uncomfortable, but his consistency is the only thing that actually kept the world from collapsing. You are walking through a landscape of ghosts, unaware that the very ground beneath your feet holds secrets that could reshape your entire understanding of human history. If you want to understand the true power of the ancient world, you must look past the monsters and see the duty, the heavy, calculated responsibility that forged empires from dust and ruled millions with an iron grip. We often focus on the myths, the mythical beasts, and the legends used to intimidate the masses. But those stories were merely the veil. Behind that veil lay a sophisticated system of governance, law, and survival. They didn't just rule through fear, they ruled through a calculated mastery of logistics, architecture, and societal obligation. When you strip away the folklore, what remains is a chillingly precise blueprint of how civilization survives against the chaos of nature. This isn't just history. It is a manual of power that still echoes in our modern systems today. The truth is hidden in plain sight, buried under centuries of mythmaking and cultural layers. You have to decide if you are willing to look deeper than the surface level. Subscribe to uncover more hidden truths as we peel back the layers of the past to reveal the mechanics of how the old world truly functioned. Don't let the truth stay buried in the shadows.